right, everyone, welcome back to all those early birds. Thank you to this table in particular that were back even before we asked. So those two tables there, fantastic, great job. And just before we start, because we have to be role models and all of this health stuff, I would like everyone just to etu for me, stand up if you wouldn't mind, and we're just going to do a little energizer, because we're all about health here. So sit up in your chair if you like, or stand up, and everyone have a really good stretch to the sky if you wouldn't mind. Just stretch it out. Let's get our metabolisms running here. So stretch high on one side if possible, and then high on the other side. Fantastic. All right, we're going to do something called the peekaboo. So I want you to go like this, all right, and we're going to do 20 movements where we go back and forward, all right? So count them off. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, give yourselves a pat on the back. That's nice, very good. And lastly, just a bit of marching on the spot. I know you've just walked up the stairs, but if we could do 20 marches on the spot, that would be ideal. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's good. Knees up. That's good. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, you can have a seat. Well done. We are energized. We're good. The heart rate should increase by at least 1 BPM, which is what we love, being healthy. All right, well, we are going to crack on and make sure that we get the next hour and a half under our belts, because we have got some incredible knowledge to learn and some amazing people to learn it from. So I'm going to go on with the introduction to our next speaker. So just if you're coming in, find your seat quietly. Thank you. All right. Well, it's my great pleasure this afternoon to introduce our next plenary speaker, Dr. Terry Fleming. She is a senior lecturer in the youth health for the Department of Pediatrics, Child and Youth Health and the Department of Psychological Medicine at the University of Auckland. She has worked for many years in the development and delivery of youth health services, mainly in the South Auckland, and is an investigator with the Adolescent Health Research Group. Terry's speciality areas are mental health and the interface between development, behaviour, and health status. Would you please help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Terry Fleming?
Kia ora tātou, a very warm welcome. Welcome back from lunch. Can I ask how many people were clinicians? Just stick your hand up if you're mostly a clinician. Okay, this session is mainly for you. We are very happy to talk about adolescence, and I would like to introduce my colleague Rochelle, who's working with me today.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Rochelle Moss, and I work in respiratory research, mainly cystic fibrosis, with young people and infants, and I also just finished my diploma in youth health with some really great lecturers. So yeah, I've just come along to do this with Terry.
So lots of working with young people is about encouraging people to take the next step. So I'm practicing that in my work, and actually it also really helps make it easier for me. If you haven't seen this quote before, I encourage you to read it. And lots of you might know where that comes from. It's quite old, actually. So if you think that teenagers today are terribly difficult and more difficult than you were, you're in good company. You are not the first person to have thought that. So we're talking about teenagers, asthma, and the issue with every teenage health issue is around brain and behaviour, adherence, behaviour change. Getting teenagers to do what you think is a good idea is not necessarily the easiest. And I have to apologise to my son, he features in a couple of these pictures. So if you have to have a post-lunch sleep, the answer is that both the adults and the young people need to be in charge, a graduated responsibility. If you're going to do one thing differently in your clinical practice, I'd say give teenagers time. So a study from a few years ago, the average adolescent GP consultation was about 2 minutes. So young people come in, they often come in about something relatively simple, maybe it is asthma or maybe it's acne, sometimes sexual health stuff, that's addressed and then they're out the door. So actually teenagers are learning to take care of themselves, they're learning to do their own health, they're becoming in charge when previously their parent was. They actually need the time that they're allocated. So if you do one thing differently, give them time, explain what's going on with asthma and treatment and so on, and make the plan together. So we have to do some.
So my background is working on the respiratory ward at Starship. So thinking back to some of the young people that I've encountered, I sort of have a case study of Jess. So she's a 15-year-old female. She's been admitted to the ward with a broken leg and noted to have a history of asthma. She's been considered as being non-compliant with her medication and having poor control. She's had several admissions over the last few years and been prescribed quite a few courses of prednisone. So for this admission, while managing her broken leg, they also thought, right, we'll get on top of her asthma, tackle that. So lots of high-dose steroids. She was given all her preventers, inhalers, everything regularly, and her symptoms improved. So, we came up with a great plan, spoke with her mum, like, how can we make things better? And then we planned for discharge, so everyone was feeling really proud of themselves. However, for Jess, her view of her time in hospital was actually really different. So, for start off, she'd broken her leg, so she was already having quite reduced mobility. That was obviously going to extend following her discharge. And then the other issue is she felt she'd put on quite a bit of weight because, one, she was not able to exercise, she was taking her steroids. She'd heard people talking about, if you're on steroids, you're going to be really short. She was already short, she was worried about this. She had really low mood, which was kind of noted as, moody teenager, kind of typical. She was worried about missing school. She's in, getting towards NCEA. All her friends were carrying on, and of course she's sitting there on a phone watching everyone have a great time. And the last thing on Jess's mind was her asthma and her asthma control.
And in fact, of course, teenagers in New Zealand, even if they have severe asthma, are much more likely to die from mental health related issues than they are from respiratory disease. Yeah. So turning to adolescent development, and thank you to my sons illustrating the difference in 10 years. So my younger son at 10 and my older son at 20, it's a huge period of change, right? So you have those three major sets of hormonal changes driving growth and secondary sexual characteristics and primary reproductive maturity. This much growth in 2 years for the average boy, yeah? And it's not even, of course, you start with your feet and your hands and you do all that gawky stuff, and even the coordinated sports kids fall over, and only sort of towards the end do you kind of fill out and look coordinated and handsome again. And there's all the changes in emotions and arousal and motivation have quite a big physiological driver, so there's all those changes too. So if you can remember back to then, the teenage crushes, the intense romantic feelings, the embarrassingly powerful sexual drives and bits that stick out in the wrong place at the wrong time, and all those awkward things, then you get the stuff which is actually quite important for asthma, which we often forget about, which is that teenagers are driven to explore, to do new things, right? So even teenage rats will go further from the nest than a little rat or an adult, right? So right through the mammals, teenage, adolescent young things, from kittens to humans, will go further, they'll try things out, they'll do new things, they'll explore. That's biology, you can't change that. So teenagers will want to learn things for themselves, which is incredibly important that they learn things for themselves. So if you say not taking your preventer will do blah blah, that's fine, but very few of us will learn from other people's knowledge. We mostly want to learn from our own mistakes, yeah? And teenagers feeling that they're going to try things out, that they're going to push, that they're going to do new things, it's incredibly important, right? Otherwise our societies would never change. Incredibly important and very sort of fundamental thing. Then you've got all this biological brain stuff going on at the same time. So until you're about 11, 12, you're growing lots and lots of neurons, lots and lots of grey matter in your brain. It's very plastic, very good time prior to that to be learning new skills, new languages, all the rest of it. Then you start to lose the things you're not using. It starts to get more difficult to learn a completely new thing, but you do this myelination stuff, right? So your thinking and your ability to process information gets much, much faster, and that's a picture of a nerve cell, a myelinated nerve cell, which is starting to really happen in adolescence, means information can travel down that neuron about 100 times faster. Right? Massive changes, and just like that physical growth, that doesn't proceed evenly. Right? So teenagers don't make decisions a little bit more adultly, little bit more, little bit more, little bit more. You've probably seen it if you've got teenagers. One day they'll make an incredibly adult decision, be more informed than adults about something. Teenagers can be incredibly informed about all sorts of things, and next minute they step back and they're behaving like a child. Yeah? And that reflects this stuff. You don't gradually move the way you process information physically in the brain, you flip. Right? And that when you're in a situation of what people talk about as cold cognition, when you're sitting in the doctor's room or in the classroom, you can say, yes, I would do this is how I would use the contraceptive or take the preventer or all the rest of it. And then if you're exposed to alcohol, a little bit of sexual desire maybe at the party, the stimulation of being around others, actually you will measurably make decisions in a different way. Yeah? So actually there are things you can do about that. So if you do sort of pre-counselling, like, okay, you're telling me this now, what about in this situation when you don't feel like that? What would be different? What would you do? And you can kind of prep people a little bit for that so they become their own coach. One of the other things I left out here actually is the sensitivity to social status thing. That is a really interesting thing, and you might remember it. When you're a teenager, it is so embarrassing when things go wrong, right? Or even if you have to pull out your puffer. Whereas as a child, you're not as conscious of that, and as an adult, you're usually less conscious of that, right? And that is part of this kind of biological drive and some of this stuff about the sort of sexual reproductive imperative is that on some level you're wanting to be the top dog or the best ape or the most powerful thing, and actually showing a weakness or a vulnerability or not fitting in is incredibly important in adolescence, yeah? Both socially but also on some kind of biological level. So previously, if you're old like me, you would have been taught that adolescents gradually move from concrete to abstract thinking. Actually, that kind of isn't really supported by the science now. So the reality is most of us don't think logically a lot of the time. We do what's called gist-based reasoning, where we kind of go, oh, I'm going to turn right at the intersection now because it's clear. You don't weigh up the pros and cons each time. And actually, if you do, you make a more dangerous driver, right? You actually have to learn to do intuitive decision making. Now, actually, when we teach people to really slow down and weigh up the pros and cons of taking their puffer, sometimes we're doing them a disservice. Yeah? I apologise for sort of coarseness of this example, but I'm always struck when you look at ads for sanitary products on television. They never weigh up the pros and cons of whether you should use their product, right? It's all about freedom and diving into the pool and being able to do things. Actually, it's probably the same with asthma. We don't really want to be saying, if you take your preventer, you won't end up in hospital, which may or may not really feel that bad to a teenager. We actually want to say it will make you free to do things and be who you are and get on with life and all that. That's that gist-based reasoning is actually much more powerful than logical pros and cons kind of decision making, and it's a much more important part of thinking. If you think about, you will weigh up some pros and cons, but a lot of your everyday decisions will be gist-based decisions, yeah? Okay, so teenagers often don't perceive themselves to be invulnerable, which is what people tend to think, that teenagers think that they're bulletproof. But what tends to happen is they'll make different decisions in different contexts. So take much more risks with driving or much more risks with medication when there are other people around. And often they'll see the consequences and it's not that bad. So if you think you could drive fast on the way home and get there a bit quicker, but actually you'd risk having an accident or whatever, as an adult you might not do that, right? Whereas a teenager or someone else in the car will value the buzz and the good time much more than you will, and that's partly because all that dopamine and serotonin is busy building new prefrontal cortex stuff, and it's migrated in their brain. So having a good time takes more activity. It's harder to get the same neurotransmitter effect, right? So for me, I can go out to dinner with friends and I think that's a really good night. Yeah? When you're a teenager, is that a really good night? it's kind of okay, but actually you know, maybe you need more excitement and more of a buzz, and that is partly a dopamine migration thing with the brain development. So teenagers often don't see the consequences as that bad, so you say you need to take your preventer to have good control. Well, who cares about good control? Even going to hospital's not that bad, maybe being in hospital's kind of okay, and also teenagers take more risks than they intend to. Right? I think we've talked about some of that stuff. So previously, a lot of interventions around adolescence and compliance would be around teaching people the pros and cons and weighing things up. Yeah? Really important to do that, and we don't want to misinform people and stop informing people. That would be really patronising. We need to tell them about those things, but we can't only do that. So an example was road traffic deaths in New Zealand. When I was a teenager in the 80s, it was 1 in 5. Does anyone remember those horrific car crash things? It was 1 in 5 people your age will be killed or seriously maimed on the road in New Zealand back in the 80s. It's, you know, 1 in every 5 people. Now it's less than half that, right? And part of that is about better medicine, and some of it, people tend to think it's about teaching people to be better drivers. Most of it's about the stuff you can see in that picture, right? It's about we've got a lot safer cars, we've got better engineered roads, and more than anything else, this has been studied all around the world, we have a graduated driver's licence. So what that does is it moves away from the old model of doing everything for a child and then suddenly giving them full responsibility. It graduates it. So when we get to asthma, we normally see children with the parents, the caregivers take responsibility, whereas when they're an adult, you usually see them on their own and they're in charge. And with teenagers, what we need to do in this area is be doing the graduated driver's licence equivalent. A little bit more responsibility, a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more responsibility, not one or the other, right? And we need to be coaching them to be their own asthma manager. So over to Rochelle.
So just sort of thinking more, you know, in the clinical setting when you're meeting with young people and talking about asthma and their management, there's kind of 3 key points, I guess, that we want to get across. The first being based around the actual consultation time. Secondly, explaining and clarifying and not making assumptions. And the other thing is strategizing together. So in relation to consultation, a lot of, as Terry said, you know, young people only get, say, 2 minutes on average, but they actually deserve and often need that full time with you. And even if, you know, the first few times it's quiet and there's not much to say, especially if you're seeing these young people over and over, as they get to know you and you build rapport, they end up sharing a lot more information, and that information is very helpful when you're trying to kind of customise their treatment and their plans, because you know so much more about them and they feel safe to share that with you. And a part of that is actually seeing them on their own, so sort of even from 12 onwards, depending on, you know, how you think they're going. Asking the parents to just not be in the room for even just the first little bit of the consultation, and you know, most parents and caregivers are really okay with that because it's just part of, you know, growing up and getting ready for when you move into the adult world. I mean, you really kind of bring your mum along to your appointment as an adult. So, sometimes I do. But
Can I just speak to that for a second?
Of course.
So that always sounds difficult, but actually, if you explain that as routine practice, so what I do with a family is say, you've brought so-and-so here, which is fantastic. Now, when they're a child, you would have stayed the whole time and we'd mainly talk to you. When they're an adult, we're going to just talk with them. They're somewhere in between, so we will do something somewhere in between. So either this time or next time, we'll give them some of the time by themselves and then we'll bring them back in. Is that all right? Do we want to start that this time, or should we leave it for next time? And, you know, we kind of introduce it in a gradual way. Some practices send people a note as their young person's developing to that age. And if you're not sure about that, because it can feel uncomfortable at first, there is a free Goodfellow unit course which works through a whole lot of adolescent clinical skills.
The other thing that's really important when you're seeing young people is discussing confidentiality. So it's been shown that each time, not just once in a year, that you go through the process of confidentiality with a young person, they actually share a lot more information because they feel safe and they trust that you're not going to go and tell the school or tell their parents if they tell you, what they're getting up to. So it can be as simple as kind of going through the rights, the privacy rights that you might have in your clinic, but it's mainly about assuring them that, you're not going to go and share their information immediately, and the only time you are going to share is if there's some serious safety issues, and if you do intend to share, you will run that by them so they're not suddenly surprised that their mum knows that they have a boyfriend. Not that you'd share that anyway, but...
It's partly the treating the adolescent as a naive health consumer, that they don't know that they have confidential rights, who's allowed to see their notes, all of those things. And so you're kind of priming them to be able to do some of that appropriately.
So in terms of clarifying and explaining, so that's kind of once maybe you've got them on their own and you've gone through the confidentiality, talking to them and finding out what their knowledge is. So, I mean, I've definitely had young people with all sorts of illnesses, and you just take for granted that they know what that is. So, but especially like asthma, if they've had that since they're a child, maybe sometimes they actually don't really understand what asthma is. And that's why it's so important to say, if you're feeling unwell, what does that mean to you? And what is wellness? What is sickness? And you can also get a gauge of what they understand about some of the terms we use. So a wheeze might mean something to one person and something really different to someone else. I mean, we, especially in cystic fibrosis, we're always talking about phlegm and sputum. Not everybody actually knows what that is.
Do you want to?
Oh yeah, so the other thing is talking about, you want to have not a judgmental approach when you speak with them, so showing that you understand them as opposed to actually trying to coerce them, so trying to, say, if you take this is what the outcomes are, it'll be great for you, but that doesn't have necessary relevance and meaning for them, as Terry's talked about before. And the other thing is thinking about, say, Jess. So for her, she had her mother knew really, really well what was going on, and she had a great idea of what the future plan was and how to maintain it. But Jess wasn't actually really included in that decision making, so she said she felt really out of control. She's just been told what to do. No one really sat down with her and sort of saw what are your barriers, why is this difficult for you, how can we make things better. So not just assuming that she can take a puffer now, this later, when she's noticing her symptoms, she needs to stop, go to her bag, get a spacer out. That may not be practical for her, and it may not be a priority for her. So seeing what you can actually, what can you compromise on? Is it absolutely vital that she takes X, Y, and Z? Can we drop Z? Can we get her to invest in maybe the kind of the basics, and then work with her to move forward from that, I guess, is kind of really important.
Yeah, so have people seen adolescents who've had a disease or an illness since they were a child and nobody caught the explanation up to the fact they can get more now? I used to meet an awful lot of young people who had had an early diagnosis, and they had an entirely appropriate understanding for a 5-year-old. And now they're 15, so we have to kind of catch them up. And actually getting them, probably with all of us, but especially with teenagers, your behaviour changes much better if you can get the teenager to tell you what they should do rather than you telling them what to do, yeah? And it's the same with understanding. If I tell you asthma means blah, 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 you will remember that much less than if I say to you, now tell me what is asthma again? How does it actually work? And you getting that person to explain a basic principle of behaviour change. You want them to be telling you what's going on and them to be telling you the solution much more than the other way around. So with Jess, we might be saying, what actually is asthma anyway? Can you explain it to me? And why does taking the preventer make a difference to your life? And then simple compliance questions like not, do you take your medication? We usually try and use a strategy like, which dose is the easiest to remember for you? When do you find it easy to take it? Which ones are easy to take? Those kinds of things. So we're providing an opportunity to have a peer-to-peer kind of conversation with a young person taking an increasingly adult role in their own care.
So then, you can read that.
We can tell our young people an awful lot of things that they should be doing. Yeah? I actually think it would be quite interesting if you got the young person to tell the adult all those things that they should be doing. Like, I think you should loosen up, go and see some friends, watch a little bit of funny videos on YouTube, and stay out a bit later sometimes and just see what happens. We can almost be quite patronising for teenagers, and when you get adults to think about what they enjoyed or what were their fond memories from their adult years, or when you watch old school friends get together, they almost always talk about the wild and wicked things they got up to. Yeah? The wicked escapades, I remember when we snuck out at night, or when we did this or when we did that. It's an incredibly important part of adolescence. Yeah? So we have to be to kind of balance the both.
So yeah, this kind of ties back to what we've been saying, and actually kind of not seeing them as a patient that we dictate their care to, but we're there to help them improve their asthma and their general health. So they know themselves the best, and they can convey their needs the best. So giving them the space and the time to actually hear their voice and respond to that. And it can change from what, you think you might have a perfect plan and everything's going well, and then the next time you see them, no, they don't worry about that anymore. That's not a problem. So you have to kind of keep retailoring it and keep showing that interest and that care, that you put their needs kind of above the views of, we're very health focused and health model, but that doesn't really work for teenagers. So working, you can do this with any age group, I guess, but actually working with them and letting them have a voice on their own care, I think is really important.
Developing both, don't you? You need to be safe, of course. So finally, to wrap up, really both the young person and the professional or adults need to be in charge with some kind of gradually increasing responsibility and some environmental support. If you do nothing else, try giving them the time. Explain, and that means both the information but also the gist. Yeah, and the gist of most asthma kind of medication is this frees you up to get on with things, isn't it? It's remembering keeping out of hospital or having better control might be very motivating from the health professional perspective, but what's motivating as a teenager? And strategizing together. Young people, if you look at little children, little toddlers are learning to be children, right? When a little one starts walking, you make the house safe, you block off the stairs, you turn off the switches, and you get really excited about them learning to walk. And when they fall over, you pick them up and set them right and set them off walking again. So teenagers are learning to do what the next age group does, right? They're learning to make their own decisions, to love, and to develop intimate relationships, to be in charge of their own lives, all those things. There is no way you can do that overnight, right? The stunning experience of my son going from 17 at high school and home to still 17 and being at Otago, oh my God, it's like you are not there. So we're sort of having to train young people to take responsibility in every aspect of their life, including their care for their disease. So a coaching model where you're enabling them to take a stronger lead and a stronger role, really important stuff. And actually really fun. There's an absolute joy in working with teenagers once you get beyond the grunt stage, which is a really, really interesting challenge. And I've got 3 minutes. I'm just going to tell you this one little factoid, which I find incredibly useful as a parent and also as a healthcare provider. With this brain migration development stuff, how you recognise people's faces change. how you recognise facial expression. So a child will interpret this kind of neutral face that I'm doing, I guess, as fine, right? And an adult is fine. A teenage brain will tell them that that is a threat. And a neutral kind of tone of voice becomes quite a threat. And it seems like, people hypothesize all sorts of things, and maybe there's a biological reason for that they've got to, protect. There's a lot of evolutionary psychology stuff. I don't know whether the evidence will hold or whether it's just nice theory, but there's this idea that young people would have been the sort of wardens or the kind of gatekeepers at night, and their circadian rhythm is altered, and they perceive threat, social threat, very highly, more highly than adults will. So I remember with my younger son, once I realised that he thought I was being grumpy when I truly wasn't, and I actually had to tell him, I'm not being grumpy, I'm not being grumpy. And we kind of coached ourselves through that. It really made a difference. So give teenagers time, be friendly, and sort of almost have to be a little bit more proactively friendly than you might expect with other age groups, actually. Explain both the information and strategize together. Thank you very much.
I made it. I was just energising myself. On that note, if anyone needs to run around the room at any moment, please feel free. Look, thank you so much, Dr. Terry. How about one more round of applause for Dr. Terry and her colleague here? I think we're ready for our next speaker. Straight into it. Dr Glenis Mark, PhD, Ngāpuhi, Tainui and Ngai Tahu, has been involved in Māori research for a number of years, focusing on perspectives of Māori health and healing. She has recently completed postdoctoral research with Māori patients, exploring their views on collaboration between Rongoā Māori and medical treatment, and hopes to conduct further research in this area with medical staff. Would you please welcome Dr. Glenis to the stage?
Kia ora koutou. As you've heard, my name is Glenis. I'm from Ngāpuhi, Tainui and Ngāi Tahu, and I'd like to thank the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation and the Allergy New Zealand for having me here today to speak. I am a Māori health and healing researcher, so I have been focusing on researching Māori health for the last 9 years in my Master's, PhD and postdoc, and I'm going to talk a lot about my PhD, where I talk to healers about the underlying philosophies of Rongoā Māori, and in my postdoc research, where I talk to patients about their ideas about healers and doctors working together. So I was asked to come today because the organisers wanted something a little bit different, and one of the main differences with my presentation is you won't see any stats in my presentation. You might be quite pleased to hear that. And the other thing is that I'll be moving away from the specific topic of respiratory care, but I believe that collaboration health treatment can happen in any of the areas of health treatment that we can think about. Also, I'm interested in collaboration because, as we've seen in a lot of the presentations this morning, the stats for Māori and Pacific Health aren't good. We need to find as many different ways of caring for our Māori as possible. And also, Māori and other people are already taking rongoā in association with medicines. So they may or may not tell their doctors about that. So that's another reason why collaboration research is important. And on a personal note, I'm a kidney dialysis patient. So I've been a kidney dialysis patient for 26 years now, and I've had 2 kidney transplants. So a lot of my research interest in terms of health treatment and healing treatment have gone along with my own health journey in and out of hospitals. So I'm very familiar with doctors and nurses and telling doctors how I would like things to go. So I'll just give an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So just giving a bit of a definition of Rongoā Māori in case some of you don't know what that is. Looking at the literature on collaboration, there's not much, but there's some. And talking about what healers think about collaboration as well as patients, and looking at is it even possible. And also looking at the future research that I'm currently involved with and hoping to put together in the future, and hopefully seeing some correlations with the respiratory care sector. So there is some research looking at rongoā rākau. So plants and herbal remedies is one of the main aspects of rongoā. plus miri, so a lot of massage that goes alongside with wairua healing. And then the wairua spiritual beliefs and practices, those are really important for all healers, which involves the use of things like karakia and the use of spiritual gifts to diagnose and treat. And those are some of the main differences between mainstream health treatment and Rongoā Māori. And also there's been a couple of studies focused on this topic in particular. So Rhys Jones did a lot of research with doctors and patients, and he found out that everybody thought that Rongoā Māori should be incorporated somehow alongside health treatment, and he felt that the best way that should happen would be through Māori health providers. That was a good 16 years ago now though, so a lot of things have changed, and there's been a lot more different areas in particular through my research. And also a collaborative report that was done by Stuart and a few other people in Tairāwhiti and Gisborne, where they talked to whānau and patients and clinicians about what they thought should happen. And basically they wrote up a whole bunch of frameworks about how collaboration should work, in particular focusing on the relationship between the clinician and the patient, as well as the healer and the patient, and some of the Māori cultural cultural values and ways that collaboration could work. So their recommendation and that research was to put it into implementation, which hasn't quite happened yet. And looking at my PhD research, so I talked to healers about their healing practices. So instead of saying, what do you think is the underlying philosophies of Rongoā, I focused on asking them to describe their practices, what they do, how they do it. I talked to 17 healers and used narrative interviews, so trying to get them to talk for long periods of time rather than me questioning every single thing that they were talking about. And I created a data analysis framework for that research that focused on a whakatauki. So trying to incorporate cultural values into all of our research practices and processes are really important in terms of Māori health research, so it's a standard practice for most of us now. And these are the results that healers felt. So you can see that there's some support, there's some people who are ambivalent, and some who feel that it would be conflicting. So there were quite a few who are in support of this idea of healers and doctors working together. A lot of support for science and healing to find some common ground and be able to work together. And there were some that had a lot of concerns, obviously, looking at being worried about the integrity of Rongoā and how healers can actually do what they do without being restricted. And then there were a couple of people who felt that they were too worried about Rongoā Māori being in our health treatment system, so they didn't think it should be there. So a wide variety of views, but actually most were in support. And then switching to my postdoctoral research, talking to patients about what they thought about healers and doctors working together. So I talked to 30 patients in Auckland, Hamilton and Northland, and I made some cultural adaptations, again putting Māori cultural values into research methods using photo voice, and I did thematic analysis of participants' talk. I used photos in this research to give patients other ways to express themselves rather than analysing the photos themselves, but there was heaps of photos of land and lots of food, lots of seafood and fruit photos about that type of thing being healthy, and also lots of pictures of people's medications, whole piles of them. So there was a wide variety of understandings of what health and illness and health treatment are about. But the final results were that there was actually a strong support from patients for Rongoā Māori and primary healthcare to collaborate, and many of them felt it would be really beneficial. So if healers and doctors were able to just share their knowledge and work together in treating patients, then that would be something that they would be really interested in. There was strong support for this idea of healers and doctors working together, but at the same time, patients felt that doctors would be really unwilling to accept the concepts in Rongoā Māori and be able to work with healers, and so they felt like if it were to happen, it should be separate. So you should have to see the doctor over here and see the healer over there, because putting them together would be a bit confusing. So that was the majority view, in support but sort of keep them separate. And you can see here some of the photos of people's medicine and people's rongoā that they made themselves. And so this is one of the reasons why collaboration is important, because a lot of these people who had these piles were drinking kawakawa and using other different remedies, other alternative remedies as well, not just Rongoā Māori herbal remedies, but whatever they felt like would be good, like manuka honey on their sores and things like that. So it's widespread, and most patients will actually use home remedies and alternative treatments way before they'll go to the doctor. So they'll have this progression of decisions that they'll make. First, they'll start with their family and ask for those ideas, and then they'll start looking things up on the internet and treat themselves, and then they'll go to the doctor when all else fails. So that was a pretty standard story that most patients gave. So just looking at whether collaboration is even possible, this is a table that I adapted from Cohen, and as you can see here, there's quite a lot of difference. So Western medicine is focused on pathology and curing disease, and Rongoā Māori is really focused on influencing the health and healing of the person in the whānau. So sometimes when you look at Western medicine or medical health treatment in Rongoā Māori, you might think that they're completely separate and unable to find any common ground, if you can see through all that table. But there actually are some similarities. I mean, Rongoā Māori and doctors both provide treatment for illness. They both give a diagnosis. They both have different ways that that diagnosis is given, and a variety of methods are used to treat the patient. So healers will often say to patients, look, I can't help you, maybe you should go and see my auntie or an uncle. So they have an informal referral network of their own, the same way that doctors would refer their patient to a specialist. So lots of different methods, but they're actually doing the same thing. And obviously in Rongoā Māori healing and in medical health treatment, there's a lot of advice given to the patient about what they've come for, but other things as well, such as how are things at home, what's the home situation like, do you have support? So all of those things are actually quite similar. So there are some similarities. And of course we do have the differences. The underlying philosophy, the cultural value base of Rongoā Māori is quite different. And also, there's not much research validating Rongoā Māori, so that's one area that probably I'll be focused on in terms of, what kind of research is it that doctors need to sort of have some confidence in rongoā. And also, there's a lot of, the opinion of healers and patients is that doctors are not going to be open, they're just going to be too suspicious of Rongoā Māori, and are there any ways that we can do that? In fact, it's not as bad as I had thought. I actually went for my kidney transplant appointment, and the senior renal consultant said to me, I've actually realised that we haven't had any improved health outcomes here, so maybe we need to start looking at things like Rongoā Māori to help try and improve those health outcomes. So he's come to me, and so we're actually looking at doing some research and collaboration together, which I'm really excited about, because it just shows that there's a lot more openness than there used to be. And I think because of the patient desire for more alternative, more healthy options, and alongside Rongoā Māori patients wanting those types of things as well, I think that's why there's a more of an openness than there used to be. And so one thing I'm involved with at the moment is I'm trying to put together a survey of medical professionals' attitude to Rongoā Māori. So Dr Jonathan Koya and he's a cancer surgeon at North Shore Hospital. We've put together a survey, and we want to send that out to all the DHB staff, just asking them what are their attitudes to rongoā. In the beginning, actually we need to ask them, do they know what that is? Because when you look at the DHB population, there's a lot of different ethnicities in there. A lot of people have come in from overseas. So most probably, maybe the majority may not even know that there is a Rongoā Māori. So when we get results like that, then we have to look at solutions for those. Also we might be unpacking a can of worms, but that's what research is about, exploring the issues and finding what comes out and then looking for solutions. And then also we're looking at further research and collaboration, getting to the nitty-gritty of the issues and finding out what's the issues that need, working on and exploring further, so we can look to moving ahead. Just looking at relevance to respiratory, I don't know if many of you know, but one of the main treatments for respiratory problems in Rongoā Māori is kumaraho. I've heard stories of healers where one healer told me that her son had been coughing for 3 weeks in Australia, and he came back because he was so sick. And she had to force him, because it's really bitter medicine, force him to drink a 2 litre of kumara hau, and then he slept for the first time all night for the first time in 3 weeks. So there are some really effective treatments for respiratory care, and I suppose that's only known within Rongoā Māori circles, but that's an area of exploration as well. I think it's patients are asking for different health treatment options, more healthy options. They're trying to get away from medication, addiction, and we're trying to reduce medication use, and so they are interested in Rongoā Māori, more natural options, and also still looking at the issues around collaboration between doctors and healers. How can that work and be really effective? And then the potential for actually put it into practice. What does that look like? Do we get them separate, or do healers and doctors talk later? So all of those things still have to be unpacked, and so that's the space I'll probably be in for a little while now. And so just some of my references there. I think I found it really interesting this morning listening to all the presentations in terms of the research space I'm in. I think that there's one thing that research does actually do is it gives you an answer for what you're studying, but it also shows you how much else you have yet to study and yet to research, and probably shows you more problems than the question that you're answering at the moment. So that's one of the things I think I've learned from here today, and I'd like to thank you for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glenis. Well, we look forward to having you back for question and answer very shortly, but on behalf of the conference, we'd like to give you a little gift, a token of our appreciation. So one more round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Well, how about we just take a little pause? We've been sitting for about an hour. If you'd like to stand and just have a bit of a stretch, now is the time. Now is the space. That's good. Take the opportunity while you've got it. So from here on in, we've got one more plenary, half an hour, and then we've got a 15-minute question and answer, and then we've got afternoon tea, and we're going to do our breakouts for our workshops. And just to sort of let you know what's going to happen with that while you're listening, we've got 2 different rooms we're working in for the workshops. So just next door, we've got room A, and in room A, we're going to have respiratory workshops, and then in here, we're going to, no, not quite. So further over, Teresa, thank you. Further over, we've got room B, and in there, we've got our allergy workshops. And what we'd love for you to do after our question and answer at morning tea, grab all your things, pick them up, and then take them to the rooms, and then we can rework this room for something exciting later on today. That's what we're going to do. I've got it, thumbs up, thank you. All right. Well, get comfy again, because I have another person to introduce and the name of her talk is We Can Work It Out. Great Beatles song. So here we go to introduce our next guest. From 1992 to 2015, Susan Reid was the consulting manager at Workbase, a not-for-profit charitable trust. Following the closure of Workbase at the end of 2015, Susan and her colleague Carla White established Health Literacy New Zealand. Susan is currently working with government agencies, district health boards, NGOs and PHOs on diverse projects, including research about childhood asthma, self-management support in primary care, professional development, and the development of patient education materials. Please welcome to the stage Susan Reid.
Tina natu waka ko tarakehe te maunga ko ko hokianga te wahapu ko te raro ko tau Māori te hapu ko mātiatia te marae ko Susan Reid takuinga. Kia ora whānau. I'd like to echo Glenis's thanks to the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation and to Allergy New Zealand for inviting me to talk today. Actually, I was thinking, having heard Glenis's talk and also having heard Terry's talk, I was thinking that for half an hour I would just have a little lie down here, because Glenis talked a lot about health literacy. She didn't name it as health literacy, but I was going, tick, health literacy, don't make assumptions, tick. Patients aren't logical. Hey, I'm not logical. And I was thinking, oh, good, I could see those sofas, they look really, comfy, I'll have a lie down. But then I thought, actually, I better do what I'm meant to do. So I know the theme of this conference is today's research to inform tomorrow's practice, but I'm sorry I'm taking you backwards. And partly this is because of what Terry talked about in context, because I celebrated my 21st birthday here in a bar downstairs. It was when it was the Big I, and I texted my husband and said, what was the name of that bar we used to go to? And he said, I can't remember, I know exactly where it is though. And I said, yeah. So, you know, when I come to this hotel, even though it's called the Pullman, to me it's still the Big I, and there was a bar downstairs where I spent much of my student and young adulthood enjoying myself. Now, I often use music in my work. I've used Michael Jackson and Elvis and Kenny Rogers and Waiata and Freddie Mercury, of course. And so I explained to my colleague, who's a little bit younger than me, I said to her, I'm going to use the song, We Can Work It Out. And she said, what song? I said, oh, for God's sake. I said, it's by the Beatles. She said, who are they? And so anyway, apart from wanting to give her a good slap, which you don't do with your colleagues, so what I want to do is position this presentation that reflects the context. So it is now 2:30. Glenis, you were really fast and you've made me have to talk more. But I'm not going to. I'm going to leave more time for questions. So it's a half an hour presentation. It's after lunch, so we've got the postprandial sort of and also it's before the respite of afternoon tea. So I realise in this group I'm to some extent preaching to the converted. Well, I hope I am. But it's a bit like I'm trying to be the grit in the oyster, because what I'm asking you to do is do something reflective. And I know some of you will use reflective practices a lot, and some will use it sometimes. So what I want you to do with this presentation is think about your practice and reflect on what you could do differently as a result of listening to this. Now, is the clicker, Adam, over there? Thank you. First rule of conferences, get to know the AV person, especially when they're young, they save your bacon. My daughter no longer lives at home, and she used to fix all my PowerPoints and do all my technology, and now I'm relying on Adam. So Adam, could you start it? Is it going to go? It's not going after all that. Well, I'm not singing it. Okay, so for those, well, I suppose we could all sing it, but believe me, my voice isn't great. So this is, as you know, a Beatles song. And the reason I've put it up is because the words of this song actually give you a whole lot of clues. So here we go. I suppose I should, do you want me to stand over there? It tells me how many minutes I've used up. Okay, well that's probably useful. I'll stand here. Okay, so here we go. Try to see it my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on? While you see it your way, you run the risk of knowing that our love may soon be gone. Think of what you're saying. You can get it wrong and still think that it's all right. Think of what I'm saying. We can work it out and get it straight or say goodnight. Life is very short and there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. I have always thought that it's a crime, so we'll ask you one more time. Try to see it my way. Only time will tell if I'm right or I am wrong. While you see it your way, there's a chance that we may fall apart before too long. We can work it out. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. No singing. Although with all these beautiful ladies in the room, we could have had beautiful waiata. Okay, so what I want to do is say that there's a lot of answers to consultations in that song. The words of that song tell you a lot about what patients and whānau want. They want to be listened to. So I've just got a few slides, and I'm going to finish early too, I think. But this, I saw this picture, and I thought, oh my God, this is it. So it's not very good, as you can see, it got over. If this was exercise for me, I'd be thin. It'd be so fantastic. I try not to jump to conclusions, particularly in my health literacy work, but I still do because I'm fallible, okay? But this is the thing that is overwhelming for whānau, is that health professionals, and sometimes I call us we, even though I'm not clinical at all, that we do jump to conclusions about things. And sometimes those conclusions are not great. So yesterday I was speaking to the diabetes team at ADHB, and she was talking, one of the health psychologists was talking about she'd been asked to see a Pacific man who had quite a significant leg ulcer, and because he was non-adherent, non-compliant, all those terrible words that people don't understand but mean bad things. And anyway, so she was asked to see him, and within a very short period of time, realised that his leg ulcer wasn't healing because he was crushing his metformin and applying it to it topically. And nobody had found this out. Now, when you think about it, if you have a squeaky hinge on a door, where do you put the oil? You don't tip it over the whole door, you put it on the hinge. So the whole issue here is that we don't explain the systemic nature of medication. We don't explain that when you swallow it, it actually goes through your body and makes a difference to, your tissues, affects part of your anatomy and physiology. So I thought, well, this is good. It's okay because with asthma, it's breathing difficulties. So most people would know that, you use your inhaler, you use it through your mouth. And we all know that old chestnut of Dr. House. You've seen that, yeah, of course you have, you're all respiratory people. So we know that old chestnut where, the woman was spraying it behind her ears. But actually, you didn't have to see Dr. House. So a couple of years ago, I was working with a primary care practice nurse in counties, and she told me this story, and I thought, oh well, it's close to home, I suppose I could use it. She told me this story about a woman who was diagnosed with asthma quite late in her life, in her 50s, and one of the issues was she actually had quite a few cats. And so she was given prescribed inhalers, and this nurse was actually following up with her and seeing if she was getting better. And she wasn't. So actually she went out to see her and said, well, tell me what you're doing. What do you think she was doing? She was spraying the cats, which I'm not sure they were too thrilled about that. And they probably scratched more and licked more as a result. But it was quite, like in that woman's mind, as Terry was talking about, that was logical. The cats were causing the problem. So therefore, they were the ones that had to be treated, not her. And I think that sort of takes me to this next slide, which is this whole thing. And Terry and her colleague, I'm sorry, was it Rochelle or Michelle? Rochelle talked about this, is that assumptions are the most fabulous things in the world. They really are. We assume that the sun will come up every day and will go down again. We assume that your alarm will go off in the morning and you'll get up. We assume, not so much in Auckland. We assume that the motorway won't be too bad and we'll get to work on time. For those poor people in the South Island, poor people in Christchurch, we assume you might have another earthquake. Please God, no, but it seems to be the case. So assumptions are absolutely fabulous. We couldn't live our lives with them because we'd be what-ifing all the time. But assumptions are absolutely useless in clinical interactions. You've got to just stop those assumptions and start with a conversation. I did some work with the patient experience day they had at patient experience week they had at Counties Manukau. And they have a consumer council there, and they put up a slide where they'd interviewed a whole lot of patients, and it was the saddest slide I'd ever seen, and they put it up because it was like, they were sort of proud of it, and I was thinking, I'd be hiding that one. Anyway, a patient said, nobody cares what you know. And to me, that's a tragedy, because that's the starting point for me with any engagement I have with whānau, is like, find out what they know. And what do they know about their rongoā? What do they know about their asthma? What do they know about their treatment? What do they know about their whānau experience in this? What do they know about what's worked for their whānau and what hasn't? Find out what they know and don't make any assumptions. And I always talk about this in terms of health literacy. People make assumptions that either people know a lot, so they give them a little bit of information, or they make another assumption that they know nothing, so they give them a heap of information. And as human beings, there is nothing worse than having somebody tell you something you already know. Because your brain just goes, oops, switch off. Forget teenagers, adults, we hate it. My husband tells me that all the time. Hasn't stopped me though. He's got very low health literacy, he needs a lot of help. I told him this morning, I said, I'm going to talk about you again. He said, oh my God, I'm used to it now. Luckily, he said, nobody's seen his picture. He doesn't know that's not true, but not in this one. Okay, this is the most important thing. And I do a lot of work with rheumatologists, dermatologists, and gastroenterologists. When they have their conference, it's called the Grand Conference. It's really fantastic. And I was at, I know this dermatology nurse, and she's really lovely. And I was at this, their conference, and they were doing a presentation about motivational interviewing. And the nurse got up and she said what she'd learned from motivational interviewing training was that she had to put listening alongside her clinical skills. I just about fell over. And I went up to her afterwards, because I've met her a couple of times, and I said to her, look, I know you're a really good nurse, and I know you're a really good person, and I think you listen. She said, I've realised I don't. She said, I've stopped listening, I'm focusing on clinical things. And I thought, well, if it took motivational interviewing to make that change, perhaps we should have motivational interviewing for everyone. Most health professionals, and I put this in a general context, we do it as human beings. We listen to reply. So we listen, and sometimes you can see it on people's face. So somebody, as a whānau, maybe you say something, you see the health professional go, yippee, I know the answer to that. And if you're really unlucky, they tell you the answer straight away. Instead of going, oh, that's really interesting, we can talk about that later. Is there anything else? And then, is there anything else? So it's like a game of tennis. You hit the ball over because you ask a question, they hit the ball back, and they answer your question. You hit the ball over again, hit the ball back, and then you put the ball down, because everything you're saying, they've got an answer for. And usually, it's putting you in the wrong place. So what I'm really asking you to do is do what Stephen Covey calls listen to understand, which requires asking far more questions and then saying, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Is there anything else? We can work it out. Talked about this. Talked about walking in whānau shoes. Actually, it was really good for me. So I'm wearing relatively good shoes today. Someone's already complimented me on them. And I've become quite interested in people's shoes now, because I worked with someone who was an absolute shoe nut. And so I look at people's shoes, and I've been known in the very long queue at LAX airport to tell a young Japanese man in front of me that he had fabulous shoes. He thought I was the weirdest woman he'd ever met in his life. He immediately created quite considerable distance between himself and me. But actually, until I came to this conference, I was wearing a pair of very expensive, actually more expensive than these shoes, Asics, because I've got plantar heel pain, and I've got very sore feet at the moment. So I couldn't walk in those shoes if I tried. But we actually, it's an old saw, this whole thing about walk in whānau shoes. But actually, we can't walk in whānau shoes because we don't know them that well. But what we really need to do is stop walking in our own and actually stop bringing our shoes in so much and actually try as well as we can to understand what's going on for whānau. yesterday when I was talking to the diabetes team in Auckland, I said to them, they were telling me about the man with the metformin on his leg, and I said to them, okay, can you tell me about that man in terms of his life? Is he working? Who's a whānau? Who looks after him? Who helps him make decisions? And they looked at me, and a couple of them said yes, they could. The house psychologist was one of them, thankfully. And but others said no, they couldn't. And that's the thing I think that I find the most difficult working in health literacy is I expect you to know that person. And I don't mean know that person, but I expect you to be able to tell me about that person. What's, you know, that thing about what's important to them. You know, is it really treating their respiratory disease that's important, or is there something else? Is there something else you've got to deal with, another priority, before you can deal with their respiratory? Right, and we've come to the end. Okay, so I have to travel, hopefully, okay? I'm doing this particularly well at the moment because the sun's shining and I don't have seasonal affective disease, which I seem to get in the winter. The sun is shining and, oh, I feel good because it's summer, even though we've had terrible weather, but it's summer is coming. So I'm travelling really hopefully, and I believe we can work it out. I believe we can listen to what whānau say, and we can actually make a difference. That we can push our assumptions to one side and think, what is going on here? I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling judgmental, I'm feeling, they're not trying hard enough. I'm feeling, as one nurse said to me one day, unfortunately she was related to me, said, oh Susan, our whānau, they just don't understand. And I said, actually, we're just not being clear enough. It's not about them not understanding, it's about us being clear. So, on the basis that we're travelling, hopefully, I believe we can work it out. So, kia ora whānau, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just keep this.
Absolutely. Well, that was a really informative talk. I've wrote a lot of notes about that. So, another thanks to Susan Reid, everyone.
Thank you so much.
It's all right. Now, she's going to stick around.
Oh,
right
shall I? Or you're gonna,
we're going to do a Q&A if that's all right.
Yeah, but others are coming, eh?
Yes, I hope so.
Otherwise, I will lie down. Whew.
Do you want to do the intro? We'll do the intro now. So I need to get up on the stage now for our awesome question and answer session. We've got our chair, Professor Jerome Dowles. We've also got Dr Terry Fleming coming back, and also Dr Glenis Mark. A big round of applause for our friends again as they come to the stage. I'll let you take it.
Oh, well, that was a terrific session, and I should say that I go to a lot of respiratory conferences, and these types of sessions are hardly ever there, and I think it's a really important thing to discuss. I should also remember to say, is there anything else when people ask questions?
There's no way
Now, I'm also looking at people's shoes. Those are lovely shoes. No, you have lovely shoes too. I think you all have really nice shoes.
Not as good as that. Erin, whoa, have you seen her shoes? Whoa, killer shoes.
So we've had 3 really, really interesting talks. I've got several questions myself, but I first check whether anyone here has got some burning questions or not so burning questions. Otherwise, I'll just make a start, and that gives you a little bit of time to think of your questions. Now, the first presentation was about teenagers, and I've got an 8-year-old son, and I think you sort of indicated that teenagers don't actually tell you what to do, and you tell them what to do, and maybe they should be telling each other what to do. Now, my 8-year-old son is actually telling me what to do, so I'm actually looking forward to puberty. But one of the things, and as I've sort of alluded to earlier, I'm from the Netherlands, and often when we do studies here in New Zealand, when we report the number of children who have poorly controlled asthma, international reviewers say, are you sure those kids actually have asthma? Because they're a bit surprised that there's such a high proportion of children who don't take their medication regularly. So I'm just sort of wondering, are there differences, do you think, between New Zealand children and children internationally? And if there are differences, and I'm not entirely sure that there are, but is there anything that we can learn from the international experience? Have you come across anything internationally where perhaps we do better? And I think this is a question probably for the others as well.
There are differences in risk-taking behaviour across different communities in both positive and negative ways. I think New Zealanders are quite quick to do new things and try things out and do it themselves. And there are good sides and not so good sides to being adventurous. Yeah.
So, yep.
In terms of collaboration overseas compared to New Zealand, it varies widely depending on the population. So in South Africa, the traditional healers train alongside the medical doctors, but that's only because 3/4 of their population rely on their traditional healers first before they'll go to Western medicine. So that's around access for that country. In India, they seem to have integrated Ayurvedic practices alongside Western medicine. So those two countries have sort of gotten a lot further along than New Zealand have. But we have got a lot of work to do in terms of getting them working together and getting Rongoā into the education system. So it depends on which country you're looking at. There's a wide variety. I think complementary and alternative medicine is becoming huge in the States. So it really varies on the populations that you're looking at.
So do you have those connections? Do we have those connections in New Zealand with other Indigenous populations who sort of perhaps are further than we are in terms of integrating?
Certain different people who are doing different research projects have reached out to different countries, but nothing sort of comprehensive and sort of standardised, or so it's an area for exploration, I guess.
There's the Global Asthma Network as well. I know that with Innes and Philippa Elwood, they do a lot of work. It's a hugely, I can't remember how many countries are involved, but it's, you probably know a lot more about it.
Yeah, we're part of that as well, but I don't think there's any focus necessarily on healers or alternative sort of
There's
treatments.
a lot of interest in traditional medicine around the ethnobotanical knowledge of plants around the country, but not so much the healers' knowledge and cultural values behind those practices. So definitely lots of interest in the chemical plants, but chemical constituents in the plants, but sort of not that whole healing system. So that's where the interest is, really.
So maybe this is something that you need to talk to Innes Asher about and see if she can make that part of the Global Asthma Network. Any questions from the audience? We've got 45 minutes. Yes?
This is possibly not a question, it's actually a congratulatory response really to what I've heard, because the reflection of what you're talking about is for the deliverers to look at themselves about how they deliver to those who are receiving. And I think for a long time we have felt, and I'm a nurse, I've been a lecturer, that we've got our bag of goods and we are actually looking at what they are not doing or what we have to give to them. So congratulations to all of you that you're doing that. It's really nice to hear that we all have to take a look at ourselves about the approach that will be more effective to help you all work it out. So thanks. It's just so great to hear it. Thank you.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
I think we have made some progress, and there's always room for improvement as well. And a lot of the Indigenous peoples around the world seem to think that our nation have got a lot more than some of the other Indigenous peoples around the world, which may be true, but I think there's a lot of sharing that could go on back and forth between our country and other countries, Indigenous and non-Indigenous as well, in terms of improved health treatment and health outcomes. I think that we can all learn a lot from each other.
I think what you said, and I think around language is really important, and there is that concept in health that it's like you're like the mountain and we have to come to you, and I think that's the shift. And I know that from when we look at statistically in our population, that's going to change, because we know that we can't sustain, from a taxation base and a whole lot of other things, the healthcare system we currently have. We have to do it differently. So I'm somewhat amused. Last year I got invited to take part in something called self-care, and and people were talking about it as if it was something brand new, and I was like, actually, we've been doing this for centuries. There's nothing new. So I think that whole thing, and I'm doing some work in self-management as part of my introduction, and people, I go and talk to nurses and others, and they say, oh, we're working on self-management. I said, your whānau have been working on it for centuries, they're doing a good job. Just say to them, look, let's talk about what you're doing, because whatever you're doing, some of it's working, and then build on it from there, instead of wronging people, and then trying to make them right. It's like, start off on the basis that they're right, and then add some more. Because, people say to me, oh, that's a mad thing to say, Susan, but I think if we don't start from that position, people will continue to feel the way they do, which is they feel that they come into the health sector and they think, I'm going to get told off. I'm going to have done something wrong. It's never good on you. You've done a really good job. Catch people doing something right, even if it's the smallest thing in the entire world. Please tell people they're doing something right. Yeah. Oh, when you said, Terry, that was the thing that cracked me up. I was sitting there. When you said, oh no, I think it was you, Michelle. When you said, we asked people what wheeze meant, and I thought, ooh, sanitary products, I know what wheeze means. Light bladder leakage, who knows about light bladder leakage? But it is that thing, a word like wheeze. It means wheeze with a H, and wheeze with a, oh my God, cross your legs and hope to get out there in time. And that's why language is so important to us, because I bet some of the teenagers, you ask that question thinking, what the hell is she talking about?
Well, I think I've just learned something new.
Maybe it's because of my age. And I look at those ads for poison and think, wonder if that's going to come to me soon, yeah.
No, that's very insightful.
It's uncomfortable.
So I think there was another question over there.
Just a question around health literacy and things to help with that conversation. So there's a lot of tips from this session about ways of starting that conversation and progressing the conversation. But when you're at the point in terms of things like, from a practical level, things like asthma management plans, do you know if there's much work going on to try and produce versions of the asthma management plans which are good for people with less good health literacy? Because I'm aware that the standard asthma management plans that came out a few years ago that I use a lot, they're fine for a certain group of people, but for other people, they're just no use at all. I feel good that I'm writing them out, and I know that they don't get read and they don't get used. Do you know what work might be going on to try and provide some extra materials that we can use for people who the standard plans don't work for?
Can I just speak to the adolescent bit first of all? Adolescents need asthma plans not on the fridge. They need them on the phone.
Yes. Actually, so do adults.
And so do adults. And it actually needs to have a live link. So if your asthma is bad, phone first the primary care provider, if that's right, and the phone number is linked, so you can press it and then you're automatically dialing, yeah, and even 111, or if there are good resources online, it links to that. So it's a live, active thing, because that is, the phone is the young person's storage for everything, yeah? And actually the distribution of smartphones is very, very wide with young people. So the first thing I'd say with asthma management plans is get it on the phone. Second thing is actually asthma management plans are a hell of a lot better than some other health plans, and if any of you are in a generic primary care setting, you'll know I've just been working with young people about safety plans around mental health and suicide. I'd love to see something equivalent to the asthma management plan. So there are some good things with the asthma management plans. They're often colourful and have pictures, and those things are really important, but it needs to be on the new tech.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I'd like to put a plug in for PAMP, because if you don't know about PAMP, the pictorial asthma management for kids, they're fantastic, and they should be used routinely. But I think what you've said, Terry, is the piece of technology that's least used for health literacy or whatever is the mobile phone. Almost every patient has got one, and they have recording devices on them. And so you could use the asthma management plan you have that may be inappropriate, and just, you know, write on it the things you want it to do. So write on what it is you want, but say to your whānau, is it okay if I record this on your phone? So if you think, oh, what did I say? Oh, I can't remember what he said, you can go back and play it. So they have a recording that they can then go back and play, or you take photos of something on their phone. Is it okay if we take photos on your phone so you know what to do? But I agree that the place of apps, and some of the apps are good and some of them are really shocking, and you have to go, oh my God, who dreamed this up? But if you can get a good app that's got an asthma plan on it, that's the way to go. I have actually, for a couple of adults I was working with who had asthma, I used PAMP. I just printed them off and said, look, this is a child. We can put it, make it, I'll put glasses on it or whatever. This is what you have to do. Okay, it's for a child, but this is appropriate for you. So here's your asthma management plan. Where do you want to write it? And I first of all asked permission from them. I said, is it okay to use this? And they were like, yeah, it's the first one I understand. So great, let's use that. So I think we can use a range of things, and I'd like to say, I should have said this at the beginning, congratulations for knowing that they may not be appropriate, because, that's a recognition, because sometimes people don't know that. So thank you for doing that.
So can I just ask then, because I know that the Respiratory Foundation has, I think, developed an app, and I don't know where we are with that, but maybe someone from the Respiratory Foundation could perhaps talk us through what is available and what more work needs doing before.
It is currently work in progress, and we should know within the next couple of weeks some indication when it will be available. But I know John Wills, our CEO, he was in Australia last week talking to the people over there, so watch the space. It's coming.
And at the very simplest, you take a photo of the written asthma plan. So it's just a photo, but it is physically there and you can see it.
Can we get a microphone there?
So this is an asthma management plan, but it's to do with asthma education. We've started using an app which is called the Living Lung, which is excellent for asthma education and COPD education. And it's, for those, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a wonderful app, and you can actually get it through AstraZeneca. They can download it for you. And it's really revolutionised my teaching with whānau, because they can actually see into the lung and see what the airways look like. And it's also very good for young people because it's visual.
So are any of those apps also linked to lung, little sort of peak flow meters? Are we sort of getting close to having wireless transmission of lung function data that goes into the app and then tells you something? Is that something that...
I think we need to wait. John Wills is investigating, so I wouldn't want to comment any further.
Okay.
What we do.
Right. I think there's a question over there.
Oh, hi, Janet Deleuze from Asthma New Zealand. Asthma New Zealand have had an app working for about 3 years now. It's got action plans on it. It's got peak flow monitoring on it. What else has it got on it? ACT on it, and things like that. But it's just for smartphone at the moment, but probably for Android, you know, in the near future.
So it might be a good idea to, you know, perhaps make that information available perhaps to everyone who's attended, so that those who really need it will be able to access it. I think that'd be really good. Any other questions? There's a question in the back.
Thank you. Gillian McCloy, I'm a respiratory diabetes educator from Marlborough. This question is probably directed to Terry. In educating people about asthma, and I'm thinking also about my diabetes role in educating adolescents about their condition of type 1 diabetes, we work hard at helping them to manage their condition and knowing all about it, but there's a step before that, and that's acceptance of the condition initially. Do you see that adolescents are better at accepting or worse at accepting, or what comment have you got about that acceptance of what the condition is first?
I don't know that there's a one black and white answer, of course, but you know the classic thing to say about that is that when you're younger you tend to have black and white kind of thinking, so I either have asthma or diabetes or whatever it is, or I don't, and right now I've got no symptoms, so I kind of don't really have it. And actually taking the drugs and all that feels a bit inconsistent with that, right? So, you know, that thinking of it, that sort of slightly more black and white kind of thinking makes it tricky, because right now I'm not active, I have asthma myself, and actually I'm fascinated hearing the advances, because when I was a child it was hot water and dram brewery was what we were given as children. Stop us coughing. I'm not quite sure how well that worked, but anyway. But that black and white thinking is really challenging, because you don't want to say you have asthma and it's an absolute disaster and how terrible, and that defines your life and defines who you are. It's quite nice to have that be a small part of somebody's identity, yeah? But we need to have an idea that the asthma or the diabetes or whatever it is part of us and not the whole of us, and that's a little bit challenging as you're, you know, younger, and for some people. And I think that's where the asthma or diabetes educator or the practice nurse or the cultural support worker or the person who could spend a bit more time to help a young person or a person of any age come to terms with that. Don't know. It's very much a health literacy question too, isn't it?
I think sometimes we can't, I don't think we can wait for acceptance. I think the issue is we have to go on. I mean, in the reverse, I work with a lot of men with gout who accept gout is their burden. And, you know, there's nothing they can do about it. Now, I know there's lots they could do about it, but changing that is quite significant. So they say, oh God, here she comes again, that peddler of drugs, long-term drugs. And, you know, and so I think one of the things that Terry mentioned about defining people as part of their condition, I find it fascinating that I still hear health professionals talk about diabetic patients, and I'm like, they're people with diabetes. You know, it's that shift, and I still hear it, and I go back and I say, oh, you mean people with diabetes? Luckily, there's not a goutic patient, you know, they haven't gendered into that. But people talk about their gout patients, and I say, oh, you mean people living with gout, you know, and they think, oh God, here she is again. But I don't think, and I think what Terry said is there may be acceptance initially, and it comes and goes, but if the biggest thing in your life is something else, your diabetes and your asthma just goes down the back. If the biggest thing in your life is that mum's sick and you're having to manage a household, you're not worried about your diabetes. If the biggest thing in your life is you haven't got a job or other things that are happening, then what's at the forefront will naturally not be your diabetes or your asthma. So I think acceptance is an interesting space, and I think it's a shifting space.
I've got one more question. Is there a follow-up
I
question?
remember a story a mother told us about her child who had diabetes since the age of about 2, and she was asked at, 10, what would you like to change about your life? And her mother was standing there waiting for this obvious answer to the question, and it was some random, I'd rather be able to go to school earlier, or some such thing. And her mother was astounded that she didn't say it was her type 1 diabetes. And when she was asked later, the daughter said, "That's just me.
Yep.
That's a part of me," which was.
Just one more question. I sit on the board of the Health Research Council, and so we fund a lot of health research, including asthma, and a lot of that is looking at clinical trials, epidemiological studies and so on, and we don't seem to be funding a lot in this sort of space. So I'm sort of wondering, do we know everything already, and is it just a matter of implementing it, or is there still a research need? Is there something that we're lacking in information that we need, and what sort of research would be useful in this space?
Basically all of the above. So all of those things, we do need more research, we need more exploration, we need more different types of studies, not necessarily just qualitative, but those things take people and time and knowledge as well. And for those of us who are Māori health researchers who have qualifications, that's great, but for people like Rongoā Māori healers, they don't have an academic background or skills, and so some of that is around helping them with those type of skills, but there's not a lot of health researchers on the ground, and as well, any research that I might do still have to fit in with the criteria, the research criteria, funding criteria, as we all do. So there's all of those factors that have to come into it as well. I'd love to. Give me a few million, I'll have lots of things that I could research for you, but there's all of those factors.
I'm not sure I can make that decision myself, but I'll have a think.
I'm very lucky, because of health research funding. I'm doing a project with Tristram and Tristram Bingham and Bernadette Jones and others at the University of Otago, where we're looking at taking a well-known long-term condition management program that's used in New Zealand and adapting it for whānau whose tamariki have asthma. So we are doing some work in that space. There's always room for more, and we won't hold you to account for additional purtia.
Thank you.
I think in terms of clinical setting, although there is research available, certainly like in the respiratory team that I'm in, getting even if you've got the data or the statistics, trying to get the buy-in from paediatricians to invest in adolescent focused care, I think in my experience that's the challenge. So even if you present that, they've still got that real paediatric focus, and kind of shifting them to looking at teenagers, in a developmentally appropriate manner can be difficult, and it's kind of is that really our role to be asking about, their sexual activity, and they sort of don't see that necessarily as a priority. So I think sometimes it's getting that kind of change in attitude and prioritising adolescent healthcare is something that probably needs more attention.
Some final words from you, maybe, or has everything been said?
There's some very common themes, isn't there, across all of these presentations, and ultimately I think to some level they're about person-centred care and, taking account of where the individual is. Yep. It's very easy to not do that in a busy practice, but actually if you're able to find a way to take the time, then in the long term you might well be saving a lot of time and energy for that patient and for the practice. And certainly we've seen some practices do that in a really smart way, and sometimes it is through all sorts of strategies, whether it's the extended role for the practice nurse, or whether it's extended consultations, or whether it's an annual review, or whether it's one of those tick boxes online or on a pen and paper before you see the doctor. There are ways of maximising your clinic time so that you can kind of understand from the person's perspective, and lots of ways people are doing that.
Thank you.
I agree that there have been shifts in that way, but I think there's still another quite significant shift to go, because at the end of the day, you're still asking us to come. And it's that I think it's the investment in saying to people, actually, you're doing it. We're just here to add. And I said that before, and I say it again. We really have to acknowledge what whānau do already, because if they rocked up to the hospitals, we would be in deep trouble. And so people are managing at home, rightly or wrongly, they're managing at home and doing things that they think is right. I'm going to say this last thing. I'm just doing some work at the moment, an e-learning course on how to write clinical notes for community pharmacists. And as a result, I've been researching the rights of patients to speak to. So one of the things I'm get quite radical, in case you haven't already guessed that. So somebody said to me one day, what would you do to improve health literacy in this country? And I said, well, what I do is I would actually get a group of whānau together, and I'd work out that we would send 5 whānau a week, just one person a week, to their primary care practice and ask for a copy of their notes. One person every day. And we'd do that for 3 months, and that would change health literacy in Aotearoa. Because if you have a patient rock up and they want to see their notes and they want to see and understand what morbidly obese, non-compliant, non-adherent, non-whatever means, that is going to change how you write and speak and think about that person. So that's the significant shift, is using that language that just rocks off our tongues. That language about our whānau, we actually have to really shift that and say, I think people write things like, this patient denies. That's judgmental and emotive language. We need to stop saying that. And those are the things I think are going to make a difference. I always say that to primary care, and they look at me and think, I can see them thinking, oh my God, if we had one patient a day come in for a copy of their notes, life would stop. And I suspect it may also stop in secondary and tertiary care as well.
Okay, well the screen has been sort of telling me for the past 9 minutes now, that the time is up.
I think that's me, actually.
Oh, is that still you? But I think there was a very stimulating discussion, and I'd like to thank the audience for their active participation, and please join me in thanking the 4 speakers of this session.